Hearing good news is a reduction of hearing negative news, negativity, external, that appears to be external to our mind. Drinking, for example, it's a reduction of thirst. Geshe goes on to say, out of ignorance, however, ignorance meaning a misunderstanding, we believe that only these things bring real happiness. And because of this, we never wish to attain real happiness, the pure and everlasting happiness of liberation and enlightenment, even for our own benefit. We are always searching for happiness in this impure life of samsara. Samsara is a word we're going to look at. Again, familiar if you've been to classes. We're going to look at samsara and one of Geshe-la's recent sort of clarifications of the word samsara in a few minutes. But we can say cyclic existence because that cycle, it goes beyond this life. That cycle of looking for happiness, finding it a little bit, but it turns into suffering. So looking for more happiness, it's almost like an addiction. It's just cyclic existence. And even in our emotional life, someone is unkind to us. Immediately a sense of self arises, and that sense of self gives rise to anger, and we respond angrily. And it can be anything. Somebody cuts in line at the grocery store, polling booth, someone's not wearing a mask or is wearing a mask. Whatever it happens to be. And it gives rise to upset. Because our sense of self arises in response to that. And this cycle of thinking causes us to become angry. And I mentioned earlier, karma, cause, effect. The mind of anger leads to unpleasant future experiences. Very simple. No one gives us our karma. It's purely the result of our own past actions. So how do we break that cycle? Again, if you've been attending Monday evening classes, we've looked a lot at this in how to transform your life. And wonderful book, and Modern Buddhism as well. A wonderful book for this. And so Geshe-la takes us through the Bodhisattva's path ultimately. Learning to identify our problems and then get to the root cause of them, and then how to abandon them. And then the ultimate abandonment is bodhicitta. So that quick summary, sort of that path to abandonment, is we identify that sense of self that arises, that's our potential for suffering, not for happiness. And that sense of self gives rise, that mistaken sense of self, I should say, a mistaken sense of self is the foundation for anger, jealousy, attachment. These minds don't lead to happiness for us. They're self-centered minds, centered around a self that we can't even find, with wisdom we can't find. So what's the opposite of that? I talked earlier, the simplicity of one way of thinking and another way of thinking. So what's the opposite of those? If we abandon those, what do we think instead? The mind becomes other-centered, thinking of others being more important, being supreme. So we practice love, ultimately wishing love. I taught these classes a couple of weeks ago, and it always makes me smile when we think, pure minds that give rise to happiness, like love. And then I can almost imagine what goes through people's minds, like, yes, love, love, yeah, well, that didn't lead to happiness. If we're thinking of relationships, maybe. Because the mind of love becomes mixed. So it's not quite as clean cut as I described. The mind of love becomes mixed with attachment, which gives rise to problems and suffering. Shantideva, author of Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, famously said, and I'm paraphrasing here, actually I'm quoting Geshe, relationships principally based in attachment is like licking honey off a razor's edge. So it begins sweet and then just cuts us and hurts us because the attachment in the relationship. So the conversation with my friend, I talked about minds that lead to happiness, love being one of them. And that thought comes, well, love, happiness. Yeah, maybe to start off with. So maybe some temporary reduction of former loneliness. And then, unless we make an effort, attachment will not die on its own. Delusions won't. Again, we can think scientifically. If delusions will just cease on their own, it would have happened already. It's something I like to reflect on. More than well over 20 years practicing Kadam Dharma. If delusions are going to cease on their own, and I'm watching, I'm following these teachings, it would have just happened already, I'm sure. Or maybe a few more years. We hold out hope. This too shall pass. But without making some effort, we're just going to stay in that cycle. So if I use the word a vicious cycle, what comes to mind? When we think of someone, maybe not us, it's easier to look at someone else, creating causes of their own problems and then doubling down on that and making it worse and a downward spiral, a vicious cycle. And it can be society, producing certain kinds of media that everybody consumes and they're becoming more negative, or it can be, so I'm not blaming media for anything. Media only responds to demand if you think about it. And so, thoughts, or down to the individual. We have a friend who's in a vicious cycle. Could be a vicious cycle of poverty, an externally appearing vicious cycle, mental vicious cycle, vicious cycle. So what's the opposite of a vicious cycle? Even what phrase comes to mind? Do we have a phrase for the opposite of a vicious cycle? I shared this with my good friend Annika, a former admin director. I said, a virtuous cycle. She said, oh, I like that. A virtuous cycle. What's the opposite of a vicious cycle? A virtuous cycle. A mind becoming more and more positive and escaping from samsara. Different way of thinking. So when we engage in the practices of a bodhisattva, as we turn our attention, we cultivate bodhicitta, we turn our attention from self to other, then everything transforms. Our strong sense of self is an incredible blocker on the spiritual path. It's a huge obstacle. So the beauty of books like this is that anyone can read them. My father enjoyed this book, but always struggles a little bit, as some people do, with the concept of past and future lives. People like to go to the word reincarnation. We tend to use the word more rebirth. I prefer that myself as well, because reincarnation, carne, the Latin root, meat, like this body's going to come back. We have such a strong sense of self, of a self existing in this body, that we can't conceive of it coming back. It's difficult to even conceive of it, where it comes from, you know? To think that our body actually comes from our parents. A few cells. Cells divide, and then we end up with this. Well, there's a little more to it than that. Cells divide. You spend a whole lot of time going to the grocery store, put more food in your mouth, and then eventually this body arises, sort of in summary. But and now we have this strong sense of self, and anybody even insults our appearance, and we're offended. A sense of self arises that exists somewhere here. And because of that, we find it difficult to understand past and future lives. And because of past and future lives, we don't really grasp the enormity of the potential of suffering. Not just in this life, but in life after life after life after life. And so it causes us to waste this life if we're not careful, unless we meditate on it. And when we meditate, naturally our wisdom comes. We start to get in touch with our potential, not our limited self, this meaty body and this sense of self is in there, but our potential is what we start to get in touch with. And so when we follow that path, the same is true of others. And this is where we're going to start to look at bodhicitta. The same is true of others that is true of us. And while we're wrapped up in our sense of self, it's difficult to think of others' suffering. It's easy to think of our own suffering, but it's difficult to think of others' suffering. But if we consider our own suffering just as a basis to understand that I'm just one person, others are countless, and they're all having the same experience too. I mean, in this case, if you're in this class, then you have access to Dharma, to Buddha's wisdom to even think about this. But those people will suffer again and again and again and again. So hold that thought a second. In other classes, maybe we've looked at anger. Buddha gave 84,000 teachings that are appropriate medicine for the mind, for the right time and the right place and the right person. If we look at Geshe-la's book, How to Solve Our Human Problems, it's principally talks about the Four Noble Truths and then how to solve our anger problem. How do we ultimately solve our anger problem? If we fully accept bodhicitta, the full acceptance of bodhicitta, which is the third chapter, the title that we're looking at right now, in Shantideva's Guide, Bodhisattva Charivatara, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. If we fully accept bodhicitta, what room is there in our mind for anger? When someone insults us, someone's unkind to us, someone does something that ordinarily would have upset us, and in our mind we are completely cognizant of the suffering of that person, the immediate suffering that caused them to act in that way, the immediate cause, we can see that, and the fact that they've now engaged in an action that will lead to their future problems and suffering. They've sown a seed karmically that they will experience. We're aware of that. And also we're aware of their ultimate suffering that in life after life after life, they will not find the happiness they wish for. As was read earlier, even though they engage in looking for happiness in food, sports, reputation, career, family. So is there something wrong with that? Particularly family, that can be a touchy subject for some people in common language. Can I say I love my family if I understand they're all suffering? Parents, children, siblings, or more distant relatives, partners, all experience the same. All suffering. So when we understand that suffering, when we understand that life after life, they will experience problems and suffering, we fully accept that. We fully wish for them to be happy. There's absolutely no room, there's absolutely no room in our mind for anger or jealousy or attachment. Because the opposite of attachment, love, if we love that person, we want them to be happy. Maybe jealousy, we can consider that. If somebody has great conditions and brags about it, that relative that's coming for Thanksgiving wants to tell you how they've made a profit from COVID or something like that. I don't know, just making this up. We have no space for jealousy when we understand that that is at the expense of whatever. No matter how much money they make, no matter how good their external conditions they may talk about are, they don't bring permanent happiness. Material things. It's such simple logic. It's sometimes wonder how we can live in countries that by law you have to have education until at least 16, I believe. And, we believe that we can find permanent and lasting happiness in things that are impermanent and don't last. So why is that important? Again, going back to love. If we understand that our time together with all those people I just listed, parents, children, partners, friends, relatives, is limited, why would we spend any time arguing? And if we love them, there's no space to become attached. So where do we go with this love? Why is that a factor of bodhicitta? If we love someone, we want them to be happy. And if we really love them, we have this feeling all the time. And if we want them to be happy, what are we going to do about it? They become the focus. Their happiness. And what is the kindest thing that we can do to benefit others? Practically. So another interesting thing. I'll talk about that in a moment. Practically. The most important thing we can do is to attain enlightenment. This is the Bodhisattva's wish. This is what bodhicitta leads to. We see their suffering, we want them to be happy. And so we dedicate our life to it. And this is inner change, not necessarily external. Of course, benefiting people practically. So the beauty of ebook is, in this book, the word practically doesn't exist. In this book, 3 times. Practically. Practically. It's wonderful. I think I have an ebook version of it. And here Geshe-la gives us the advice. Although someone who has completely exchanged himself or herself with others has no self-cherishing, this does not mean that he does not look after himself. So cherishing others doesn't lead to becoming disheveled or something like that. He regards himself as a servant of all living beings, again as inner recognition, and as belonging to them. But even servants need to eat and rest if they are to be effective. Although in our hearts we would gladly give away everything we have to help one person, practically we need to manage our time and resources so that we can be of the greatest benefit to all living beings. So sometimes, even people on the spiritual path, we have this challenge with the wish to benefit people practically. So I'll let you in on, well, not too much of a secret. Gendemo, our former resident teacher, and many people remember her, is wonderful, and teaching in Washington, D.C. now. Very fortunate for people there. She once said, "I'll tell you what nuns do on a Saturday night." And so she'd been out with another Sangha friend distributing water in the middle of summer in Florida, in Sarasota, just distributing water to homeless folks. How wonderful. This is what you're doing practically. To benefit others. But if we do that ordinarily, anyone can distribute water. If we do that with the mind of bodhicitta, that we're practically benefiting others, what if we hand out water and someone's unappreciative? So ordinary person, ordinary mind hands out water, doing a good practical thing. People are unappreciative. How do we manage that situation? How do we transform that situation with our Dharma? For Bodhisattva, that propels the wish to benefit even more. We hand out water, they're unappreciative, and we want to help more. Because we understand that mind is going to create a cycle of poverty, suffering, difficulties, problem. So even in our practical efforts to benefit others, if we keep a mind of bodhicitta, then we're more effective in our external efforts. Sometimes back in the day we've had work parties at the house, at the temple, and working on the 7th Street house. I remember coming along once, excited to do some chainsaw work. A little bit dangerous to be around me with a chainsaw, but I didn't injure myself or anyone. I was working on the garden. And everybody pitched in. A lot of people pitching in, doing what they can. Some people, it's Florida, making cool drinks, keep people hydrated. Other people more able to do physical work. I thought of this because I got over to the 7th Street house, to the jungle-like backyard that we inherited. And there was some young lady in a floppy hat, and that was Gendemo. So, again, working hard. All of us, work party, working hard. But not ordinary work. Hoping that in the future there'd be a place that people can live and find a suitable place to live to study Dharma. So thinking a little bigger. But what if we get hot and sweaty, etc., etc.? I've had enough of this. But bodhicitta is the energy. Ultimately, though, we need to attain enlightenment to be the most practical benefit to others. Sometimes just a few words can transform someone's life. And this comes from bodhicitta, from bodhisattva's way, from understanding Dharma. So the more we engage in Dharma study, the more we practice Dharma, the more we cultivate Buddha's wisdom, and we take it from intellectual understanding to heartfelt understanding, transform people's lives. It's wonderful. It's the most practical thing that we can do to benefit others. So we're going to meditate on this in a few minutes. And I wanted to read from, from here. Oh, no, I don't have it bookmarked there. I told you I was going to switch books this evening. So, this is also available as an ebook for purchase. I have the ebook so I can carry many books with me. Hopefully carry more Dharma in here than books in here. So in Meaningful to Behold, Geshe-la giving commentary to the 3rd chapter of Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, the full acceptance of bodhicitta. Geshe-la says, so far, Shantideva has given extensive explanations of various Dharma methods, but how do we put them into practice? We do this by means of analytical and placement meditation on the teachings we've received. So we're going to do this in a few moments. First, we need to take a critical look at each subject. So remember, I began by saying we can question what Buddha has to say. If somebody says, oh, your most basic wish is to be happy, we think, well, is that true? And then we healthy introspection, we look and we're like, do you know what? If I look at my own life, I can see that's true. First, we must take a critical look at each subject, trying to understand its meaning and relevance for our lives. Especially a practice like bodhicitta, when the combination, living our lives for the benefit of others. That's why I read a few pieces earlier. Well, doesn't that mean there'll be nothing of me left? What about me? These are the thoughts. What will happen to me? How will I benefit people because I've given my car away? Whatever it happens to be. So we have to sort these questions out in our mind. If we don't, we won't fully engage in the spiritual life. If we don't align everything, because we'll have goals and conflicts with goals. Like eventually I'll have enough money to be happy, and then I'll lead the spiritual life. And there's goals in conflict with goals. Nothing wrong with money. Nothing wrong with following the spiritual life. But we need to be able to understand how to align these things. If we have the good fortune to find ourselves to have money or wealth, then we can do many things to benefit others. So nothing intrinsically wrong. But thinking that is going to be a permanent source of happiness, I think, is what we've already discussed. So taking a critical look, judging, testing, and trying to understand the teachings in this way is called analytical meditation. Once we have done this and have come to some conclusion concerning the object of meditation, we should place our mind on it single-pointedly. Like we did with our breath earlier, this is known as placement or formal meditation. If we think that meditation is sitting with an empty mind, we will receive no benefit no matter how long we meditate. So not only is Geshe-la giving commentary to Shantideva, he's giving it in very Shantideva style as well, very practical, very much to the point. If we think that meditation is sitting with an empty mind, we will receive no benefit no matter how long we meditate. The object of meditation can be a particular aspect of the teachings, such as the benefits of bodhicitta, or the form of a personal deity, or even our breath. So practice of a personal deity would be like Manjushri empowerment that we have coming up. And again, please ask how should I prepare for that? What's it about? How can I get the best results from it if I take that empowerment? Or simply our breath. Our breath is an object. Whatever object, so back to Geshe here, whatever object we choose, we should examine it fully to gain a clear idea of it. For example, in order to develop single-pointed concentration, we can meditate on the visualized figure of a Buddha. When we sit quietly and try to see this image in our mind's eye, holding the object with mindfulness and checking with alertness, we will be engaged in placement meditation. The entire process can be likened to setting out on a journey. If we wish to go to London, we must first gain an accurate understanding of which road to take. Otherwise, we might arrive in Manchester. If you've been to a festival in the UK, I think a lot of people know Manchester more than London. It's probably where they want to arrive to get to the temple at Manjushri. In a similar fashion, if we want to engage in placement meditation and dwell upon the object single-pointedly, we must first gain a thorough understanding of the object by means of analytical meditation. Otherwise, our efforts will be wasted and many faults will arise. This point cannot be overstated. It is a big mistake to try and meditate on nothing. So we also have a day course coming up on meditation. Not a day course, actually, it's a short retreat, like an afternoon retreat on a Sunday afternoon coming up. And we'll look into that more, improving the quality of our meditation. Again, Nadekyon's been talking about this quite a lot recently. So, the meditation that we're going to do, I'll just briefly read to you so we know what our object is going to be. And I did promise you, we have enough time for this, yeah. I did promise you that I would give some commentary from Geshe on samsara. We hear this word a lot. There's even a perfume named after it, I think. So we can consider this like personal advice from Geshe on how to make our meditation more effective. So the words of the meditation we're going to do is this. Although all living beings who are drowning in the deep ocean of suffering are looking for happiness all the time, none of them finds real happiness. I must lead them to the pure happiness of enlightenment. So I'll cover that in a minute. But Geshe says, to help us, the term ocean of suffering has great significance. So this is like a redefinition of samsara to help us get more effect, to help it touch our heart. The ocean of suffering is very different to an ordinary ocean. Each and every part of an ordinary ocean is the nature of water, but each and every part of the ocean of suffering is the nature of suffering. An ordinary ocean has an end, but the ocean of suffering is endless. All living beings are drowning in this endless ocean of suffering, although they are looking for happiness day and night. In the ocean of suffering, there is no happiness at all. Through thinking and contemplating this, we will generate wishing love, sincerely wishing to lead all living beings to the pure happiness of enlightenment. So this will help people who are familiar with the word samsara. Although we normally use the term ocean of samsara, if instead we sometimes use the term ocean of suffering, it will powerfully touch our hearts. So when we contemplate this, and I guide the meditation, we can think about the ocean of suffering that all the people that we wish for happiness for are drowning in. And the most practical thing we can do is to lead them to the pure happiness of enlightenment, to help remove them from the ocean of suffering. How can we do that if we don't have a grip on the edge or are outside of the ocean of suffering. And what is it to be outside the ocean of suffering? To be enlightened. To at least be a bodhisattva. Then we can practically help people. This is why we need to complete the path. So with that said, if you'd like to find a comfortable sitting position once more, we can do our concluding meditation. We'll do some contemplation meditation, thinking about what we've heard, connecting the dots, connecting how we need to attain enlightenment to be of practical benefit for others, understanding their suffering and making solving their suffering our aim. We can see how we can get into a virtuous cycle that will lift us and them out of the ocean of suffering. So we can begin just closing our eyes once more to help us let go of visual distractions. We can set a good motivation that I will engage in this meditation. I will do this meditation now to benefit all living beings. And then we can simply guide ourselves in breathing meditation just for a minute or two to allow our mind to settle before we engage in our guided contemplation meditation. Having cultivated some relaxed concentration, we can begin to contemplate. Although all living beings are drowning in the deep ocean of suffering, are looking for happiness all the time, none of them finds real happiness. Again, although all living beings who are drowning in the deep ocean of suffering are looking for happiness all the time, none of them finds real happiness. We can contemplate temporary, permanent happiness, how it's achieved. And as we generate that wish to benefit others, This is our aspiring bodhicitta. We now wish to fully engage our life, working for the benefit